Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now we spend a lot of time on this channel checking out how older PC hardware handles modern games, and sometimes, though far less frequently, how older games run on modern hardware. It's certainly a topic that bears discussion, especially considering that games are usually made with specific time appropriate PC components in mind. Though why wouldn't they be, right? Because of this, it's inevitable that some titles don't always age well or perform quite right when attempting to run them on modern systems. For example, some older releases are only designed to take advantage of a certain amount of cores, and other titles may lack support for the resolutions we use today, and occasionally your shiny new graphics card might not even be recognised. The list goes on. In today's video, I want to take a look back at Battlefield 3, a very well received modern military FPS that dates back to 2011, and a game that arguably is still visually very impressive. So cast your minds back to the start of the last decade. The PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 were still very much all the rage. Windows 7 was the go-to operating system for any PC builder, and the Core i7-2600K was one of the best computer processors money could buy. Pair it with a high-end offering from Nvidia or AMD such as the GTX 580 or HD 6970, and you'd be having a fantastic gameplay experience at any resolution, whether it be 1680 by 1050, 1920 by 1200 or 2560 by 1600. Yes, this was a time before the 16:9 aspect ratio based resolutions most of us use today, such as 1920 by 1080, were commonplace. In fact, most benchmark tests you can find for Battlefield 3 will have made use of the aforementioned 16:10 ratio. But here we are in 2020, so can you expect any problems? As you can see, I've been playing Battlefield 3 using my Ryzen 5 1600 and RX 5700 XT, along with 16 gigs of 3200MHz DDR4 in the background. Starting the game will give you no issues, and no additional software or tweaks are needed to prevent crashes or anything like that. The game was played in 4K or 3840 by 2160p with the ultra settings. Whether this video will be uploaded to YouTube in 4K is another story, because as most of you know, Fred Flintstone had a better internet connection than I do. Performance wise, we exceeded and maintained at least 60 frames per second in both single player and multiplayer. In fact, both modes ran near identical. It's nice to see multiplayer for this game still somewhat alive too. There were a couple of things I'd like to point out though. The HUD and in-game menus don't scale, so if you play at higher resolutions like 2160p, then these will remain quite small, as you can see by the home menu here. Furthermore, the 6-core 12-threaded Ryzen isn't fully utilised. I've labelled all the cores/threads CPU Core 1 to CPU Core 12 on the left of the screen, and only 1 to 8 are really used. That's not a complaint in any way, just an observation. It means that a modern 6-core Ryzen chip is more than up to the task of maintaining solid performance. Interestingly, maximum settings only use about 6 gigs of system memory and 4.2 gigs of VRAM, which by today's standards is pretty tame indeed. But what about modern entry-level graphics cards, namely the 1650 Super and RX 5500 XT, two of the best cards you can buy right now if you are on a tighter budget? How far can we push the settings with these two? Well, when you take into consideration the recommended system requirements list a 1GB GTX 560 or HD 6950, and that those cards can manage this, then we should have no issues. So first up, it's the 1650 Super. Again, multiplayer and single player perform pretty much the same. I jumped into a multiplayer match and found the best way to play was to keep the settings at ultra with everything turned up, but with the resolution turned down to 1440p. This is because I did notice some frame drops to the low 60s, and although the average figure will be higher than that, The reduced resolution prevents us from dropping below that magic number. I think for first-person games, especially competitive multiplayer ones, 60 frames per second is a better target to have in mind. Achieving that is no trouble here. You can see that the game isn't even using 3 gigs of VRAM, so the 4GB 1650 Super has nothing to worry about at this resolution. In theory, the RX 5500 XT should be very similar. After all, it sits close to the 1650 Super in most other titles, so we should see that repeated here, and that's exactly what happened. In situations with a lot of on-screen effect like this map, you'll see the frame rate dip a little more toward the lower end of the 60s, but that's about as bad as performance got. Both these modern entry-level GPUs will handle the game just fine, and I found no other issues to report aside from the fact you may be waiting a while for other players to join a match. So to conclude then, Battlefield 3 shouldn't give any modern hardware issues. I knew that performance should have been fine all along, but it's all about detecting whether or not there were any problems to report, and aside from the HUD issue that comes with playing at these higher resolutions, I couldn't really report on anything else, so that's good. Now in the future, I do plan to take a look at some more older games to see how they perform on modern hardware, perhaps some more problematic or well-reported problematic titles, just to see what it takes to get them working on these modern systems. So let me know if that's something you'd like to see. But as for this one, well, I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave a like on it if you did, leave a dislike if you didn't, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see you all in the next one.